Hi, this is Miley Bloxam. I am with Vicky's Fabrics in Kapa'a, Hawaii, and we're doing a little bit of a tutorial on Pick a Petal Block month 1. I know we're running a little late, but that's okay. That's okay. We're going to get month 2 going in a couple of weeks, so we're kind of excited about that. This is just a tips and tricks section. You're not going to get me, doing a full sewing video with you, but hopefully this will help you. As most of you know, Jen does this all by hand because she is an amazing hand sewing person. I am a speed demon and I like my machine, so I am doing most of this by machine. So this is going to be some hopefully helpful tricks for you, even if you're doing this by hand, or if you want to do some experimentation. Because by practicing and by doing more things, that's how you learn. So I've got my center diamonds cut for the 8-sided star in the middle. The first thing I do is you really want to use your holes on your template. So you want to use a mechanical pencil because then you can get a long piece of lead. And make sure that you mark all 4 holes and get good dots. Okay, because these are your landmarks for sewing if you're sewing by hand and or by machine. One of the things that's really helpful when I start out at the beginning of sewing on my machine is I will draw a line between the dots, because as we know, not all 1/4 inch feet are made equal. Some of them are scant 1/4 inch, some of them are true 1/4 inch. Some of us have adjusted our eye to sew a scant 1/4 inch on a regular basis. And this is a good way to double check if you know where your 1/4 inch seam on your machine is. Okay, so when you mark your pieces, do a few lines and follow the line, but notice where your foot falls as you're sewing, lining up the edge of your fabric for your foot. You may need to take a little bigger of a bite to get a proper 1/4 inch seam. Now the reason I am sewing from point to point here is so that when I get my center, to make this flatter, when you sew all these together, if these are left open and flappy, you can actually stick your thumb in there and twist, and the center of your piece comes out fairly flat. Okay, so when I sew these together, I'm going to sew them together in sets of 2 to make 2 halves, and then sew them together to make my 8. So let me show you a couple of things there. When you have, I already have a 1/4 inch in there. When you have both of these together and you're ready to go, a couple of things you can do. Again, because you want this flat and you want this open, you can push this to the side, drop your needle in at that 1/4 inch mark and sew out, and then flip it over, drop your needle in at that 1/4 inch mark and sew out, and that will leave your center open so that when you're open that up, all the center is open for you to do that flattening. Okay, so you've got your center star. Now the next thing we're going to do is put in the Dresden plates. So let's talk about Dresdens for a second. You can make, just to let you know, a whole bunch of these tumbler pieces. Not only are you making tumblers for this quilt, but if you have seen the entire quilt, the entire outside of your quilt is done with Dresden fans. So if you are on a cutting spree, just for fun, I think the last month 6, calls for 256 of these. So if you want to do some of your cutting in advance, you can go ahead and start cutting tumblers and putting them in a package for your last month. Okay, so sewing tumblers together on the machine, I just sewed from the bottom to the top all the way through. I didn't worry too much about leaving the bottoms open. Okay, so I have a whole bunch of the arcs done up, ready to go. Okay, here's where it gets a little bit exciting. I have oversized these center half circles. And the way I've done that is, this is my little half circle template. This is the exact size of the half circle that you stitch into this piece, but I have taken a square of the background fabric. Okay, so quick trick on cutting these faster. Now again, you're going to be doing a whole bunch of these for month 5 or month 6. Okay, what I do when I start cutting these quarter circle pieces that are going into the Dresden fans, if you're doing it by hand and you want an exact cut, go ahead and cut 2-inch squares. It is very fast and easy to cut 2-inch squares, and then you can lay your template on there. I have a 28-inch millimeter to cut curves. The outside curve is not too bad with a 45-inch millimeter blade, but you will find it much easier to cut these curves with a 28-inch millimeter if you're using your templates. And then just cut off that edge. Okay? So that's the fast way. Cut 2-inch squares, 8 2-inch squares, and then all you're doing is cutting your curve and clipping your corners. What I have done, because of course I'm also doing this by machine, not by hand, I have cut 2 1/4 inch squares. Okay? 2 1/4 inch squares, and then I start here and push my template to the edge, so I have a 1/4 inch on the square edge, and then I'm going to go ahead and trim along my curve. Okay. When I start sewing, because I'm using my machine, I'm going to turn this over and I'm going to start a little bit off the edge. I'm not lining up this exactly. I'm lining it a little bit off the edge, and I'm going to sew, manipulating gently along this curve until this piece is sewn in. So when it is actually sewn in, before it is trimmed out, I am going to have an oversized piece sitting in my Dresden. Okay? Did I pin? No. I just kind of manipulated this edge carefully, slowly with my machine. If any of you have seen the Sew Kind of Wonderful sewing on a curve, that's basically what I did. No pinning, but because this is oversized, we're going to trim it down. We're okay. So this sits there, and the reason I've done this oversized is I can now take this template, drop it right here where that seam is on that marked seam line. Remember, oversize this, and I'm going to cut this off and this off. I've made it way easy to sew my fan, and now this is lined up perfectly on the center. Okay? How fun is that? Okay. Now, this is the exciting part. We are going to be slipping that into the corners of our star. Got these. First thing I'm going to do is I am going to mark that center line here. Again, one of the things you can also do, this is going to help you with your 1/4 inch seam, is actually make a line where that 1/4 inch is here. So I have this here. These, when you've sewn them, stop a 1/4 inch away from the edge. When I sew these, I do back stitch on the top and the bottom because when you're manipulating this, you don't want this to come apart. Okay. What I'm going to do is lay this into here. I'm going to fold this over, line it up with the top. Okay. And I'm going to mark where this is. See where that point is? That is exactly where I'm going to drop my needle in to sew this seam out. When I double check, there's a 1/4 inch there between this point and the edge of this diamond. That's the point there that I'm going to drop my needle in so everything is flappy on the back. I want to make sure that this stays out of the way when I drop my needle in and sew. So I've sewn from the corner out. So I'm going to flip it this way. And this, you're going to manipulate so that this diamond is now on top. Okay. This is your point. You're going to drop your needle in there and sew out. And when we open this up, cross our fingers, we're going to have a very nice inset Dresden. There you go. So that's how you get that inset point very nicely. Once you're going to go along, you're going to get all your points in, and you're going to end up here. This is actually what Sharon did. She's one of our ladies here. She's got her center 8. She's got her Dresden's inset. At this point, I would recommend doing a stay stitch all the way around the curve. Now, a stay stitch is taking your sewing machine and going about 1/8 of an inch in all the way around. What that's going to prevent from happening is these things separating when we go to the next step. You're also going to double check, and Sharon did an excellent job of this, where these points actually have a good 1/4 of an inch from the point to the end of the round. Okay, so that stay stitching, you see how this is opening up? Now, if you are hand sewing the outside in, that will help, but if you want to sew in, inset the curves, having a stitch all the way around is helpful. And then we're going to go into cutting our outside setting. Our outside setting is here. And we have Jen's amazing templates. Now, this was done before I came up with this. This is done with this being the exact size of the template. As I was sewing this together, in a perfect world, if we are perfect sewers, when we get this all in set, this is going to be 16.5 by 16.5. That may not be. However, we can do a very simple thing to get our pieces to ensure that no matter what size our middle sewn piece turns out, we can absolutely get the 16.5 by 16.5 by slightly extending the size of our outside pieces. Okay, so what I did here is I made these oversized. I've given myself about 3/4 of an inch, and the way I did that is I started by cutting about 9.5 by 4-inch rectangle. Okay, 9.5 by 4 inches. I've started with a 9.5 by 4-inch rectangle. You are going to be cutting 8 of these pieces, 4 on the right side and 4 on the left side. Okay, so what you want to do, your rectangle is obviously bigger than we need. We do want this side flush with this straight edge. What I did was slide the template up, make sure that that stays flush. I'm going to use my tiny rotary cutter, really helpful on the inside curves. This is going to be trickier on the inside curve. This is going to be great on the inside curves if you're using your template to cut. Look at that. Oh! Now, here's the trick. What you want to do is when you cut this angle, you're going to cut it all the way straight to the edge. Okay? You want this angle cut all the way to the edge of your rectangle here. So you're going to get these very oversized pieces for the outside. When we sew these together, you're going to be sewing these together straight on the insides, right? You're making your rights and your lefts, and then you're going to sew those together. Between here and here, you have a lot of room to trim down to your 16.5 inch from the center. So when you inset all the way around your outside, look at that. Isn't that cool? You have a lot more room. If you were sewing this, you had to be exact. Now, it doesn't matter. You can square from the center to get to here, 16.5. If you have to trim it here, trim it in closer. It's all good. You have room. It's amazing. It's an amazing feeling knowing that you have room when this is all pressed flat to trim to your 16.5 center. Here's another trick as we're going through. If you're trying to do this by machine, you have to be careful when you're sewing this about lining up this angle, okay? When you're insetting, you want your sections to line up and your curve in points to line up. You're going to have sewn these together all the way around, but as you're pinning the outside to the inside to sew around, you want to be careful that this is pinned lined up with this. Your angle is pinned lined up with this angle. This, you're going to want to fold your piece in half, and this angle, when you're pinning, you want to line up with the center of your diamond, and then ease from here to here. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense to you. It makes a difference because if you're coming in at this angle, you see how this lines up this way? This has to be lined up as opposed to, because this happened, it being the angle here and the center here. So you have to really encourage that here. This is all bias, so you can manipulate, but you want the angles lined up properly with the seams in the directions of the radials coming out from the center of your piece. Okay? Otherwise, you're going to be pushing and pulling in weird directions. Once you're at this point, you're going to take your piece. You're going to use Jen Kingwell's favorite flatter soak product. Spray the heck out of it. Iron the heck out of it. Trim to 16.5, and you're ready to go. Hope this is helpful. See you next month. Bye.